just to put it out there, like Doc Rivers is the most overrated head coach in professional sports. So there's never been a coach to do less or do less with more than Doc Rivers in his career. That throughout his entire career as a head coach, which he's had tons of all-time great players, that in game sevens, he has an overall 16-33 record as a head coach. That in NBA history, there's been 3-1 leads blown 13 times. Doc Rivers has conceded 3 of these. His record in closeout games with 3 wins is sitting at just below 32.7% with that 16-33 record.
Nice.
For reference, the next highest of an active head coach is Darvin Ham with 50% with just a 2-2 record, with which is a pretty small sample size there. If we want to look to a larger sample size, it's Mike Malone with a 7-4 record. When you have 3 wins in a 7-game series, that should be essentially, you got this. This is the time for the other team to roll over. With Doc Rivers, it's the exact opposite, that his teams are the ones that roll over. And there are so many instances of him straight up being outcoached. And beyond just like the Celtics destroyed the Sixers because they went to the 2 big lineup and Doc Rivers had no answer for that. For a guy that like has been around basketball as long as he has had a wildly successful playing career, has had success as a head coach, it was always so frustrating to me that my biggest complaints about him as a head coach was the feel for the game stuff. That throughout the flow of a game, making adjustments on the fly, having a feel for this guy's got it going, we need to leave him in. It was always so scripted, so by the books, that I don't doubt he does his homework going in. But it's, I would argue, more important as a head coach to be able to have your finger on the pulse of this team needs this right now. I got to leave that guy out there a little longer. I have to cut the minutes. This matchup's working for us. We got to ride with this a little longer. That's what being a head coach is. That there's a lot to it. There's obviously the player management, the X's and O's, drawing up plays. There's a ton that goes into it. But for a guy that has as much and as vast of basketball experience as he had, for the feel of a game to be such a weakness is so just absurd to me. And then like when we're talking about like him directly lying to the media, which he does all the time, and there's quite clear examples that we've even brought up already in this. Like I remember specifically, I personally took offense to some of like the almost demonstrative attitude of I'm greater than you that he took with the media. Like he was an intimidating interview being in that room. I was never a guy who was quick to sprout up my hand and ask Doc Rivers a question because I just, I would defer to other people in the room for this situation. But I've seen it like quite clearly in front of me. Like I remember specifically after DeAndre Jordan, who, by the way, somehow is still playing successful minutes for the Denver Nuggets, that somehow is still giving them positive minutes on the court, which makes 0 sense to me because he looked like he could not jump while he was wearing a Sixers uniform. But after Doc Rivers continued to play the corpse of DeAndre Jordan over Paul Reed for months at a time, I remember Derek Bodner specifically asking the question of what are you going to do with the Paul Reed versus DeAndre Jordan matchup? Now that we've kind of seen it, this was right after Paul Reed had success. And then Doc immediately snaps and says, we're going to do what we've done the whole season. And when it's a small ball matchup, we're going to play Paul Reed. And when it's a bigger center, we're going to go with DeAndre Jordan. And to Bodner's credit, he immediately bites back. It's like, well, you have not done that the whole season. Like Paul Reed has not played in 3 weeks at this point. But my point in this being, like, for Doc Rivers not only to make the wrong on-court decision, but then to defend it and then to make up past situations. Like, dude, we're all watching the game here. You're not doing this closed curtain practice that you can tell us what happened. The game happens in front of everybody. We saw the decision you made. We saw who was on the court. So just this like distorted view that he kind of sees the universe or sees his decision making, the excuse making is so infectious to teams. We're seeing it right in front of our eyes with the Bucks. And I'm so out on this Bucks team. I think this team has 0 chance of winning a championship. I think with all the flaws, with all the holes, with Doc Rivers, the excuse is already pouring out. And then there's little things like, did you see the Dame Lillard clip from his all-time starting 5? How do you not throw Giannis in there as far as your top 5? I'm not even a Giannis guy, but as like a neutral party, Giannis is still for sure one of the top 5 players in the NBA. So how do you not name your 2-time MVP teammate as a part of that list? So insane to me. It just feels like there's so much wrong. And I do think the direct source of all of it is still Doc Rivers.
Yeah, dude. And like going back for years now, like I felt like the hire of Doc Rivers for the Sixers was like a credibility thing. It was the ownership being like, we need to move on from this process era. Brett Brown is out. We need to bring in someone with tenure and someone with, people trust him. People like see Doc Rivers. They see validity. They take us seriously. And he was supposed to bring that culture, like accountability. Like, I remember it was the first thing they like pounded the table for was like, He's going to
Yeah.
keep guys accountable. He's going to tell them what they don't want to hear. And obviously, we don't know what happened behind closed doors, but for everything we've seen from then has just been excuse after excuse, pushing guys under the bus. Like me and my roommate talked about it the other day. Like, how hard what do you think it was for him to just say, yeah, you know what, Ben Simmons could play point guard for us, or at least give you a real answer to a question that we still don't know the answer to, how that would have played out otherwise. And I'm not saying I don't want to have revisionist history and say that things would have been different, but like that was maybe the first time we ever like looked at it and was like, you know what, maybe he is like just kind of an asshole. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways that we could judge that situation, and maybe that was a lot of I think I look back on that, I think it was a lot of Doc Rivers' issue that caused that. And obviously he allowed Joel to grow into what take steps into what he is, but there's really no denying that Joel did that on his own. He was having the best season of his career.
Yeah.
He is a force to be reckoned with. It doesn't matter who's holding the clipboard. It could be Joel himself. And I think that he would have done as good of a job. And you look back on Doc Rivers and all of these tenures that he's had, his most successful seasons, he had one of the highest IQ players in the league quarterbacking his offense. You look at Rajon Rondo, and there's clips of Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce talking about how, yeah, dude, when Doc would call up a play, we'd get out of the huddle and Rondo would be like, nah, fuck all that. We're going to do this,
Yeah.
and this instead. If that's the case on a team that was winning a championship, how much did
You're
the
not a
head
good
coach have
coach.
to play?
Yeah.
Not a good coach. So, and we talked about culture, like that's, like, X's and O's, blah, blah, blah. He might miss the mark on this or this, but culture-wise, he's going to set the standard. And 2 weeks into coaching a team that he's now 3-7 in his first 10 games, he's thrown his ownership and front office under the bus. He's thrown his team under the bus, and he's avoided any sort of accountability for any sort of deficiencies that they have, while having also basically played at least somewhat of a part in getting the original coach fired and then acting like he had no idea why it happened. Like, it's the most insane. Like, he's an evil villain. Like, he's the like antagonist in a movie. That's who Doc Rivers is. He is like, I literally said to someone, I was like, he's just the worst. He's just the worst person in the league right now. He's the worst like ambassador for the game. He's the worst at bringing young guys and showing the new talent. He's the worst at like everything. He's just the worst personality there is. I don't know why anyone would keep him around. And yet not only the Sixers kept him around, but then ESPN gave him a job. And then he was like, you know what, I'm actually going to take a different job. And then he was lying about other teams calling his phone. So I can't do it anymore with this guy. I'm done with him as a whole.